As soon as my neighbor's African father arrived, there was an unspoken shift in the air around me. The neighborhood always carried the same predictable rhythm: children running in the streets, women chatting in their courtyards, the familiar sounds of vendors passing by. But that day, when I saw him step out of the car, everything felt slightly different, almost as though life had paused for a breath. He wasn't just another visitor. He carried himself with a presence that was impossible to ignore. Tall, well-built, his movements deliberate yet effortless, there was something both foreign and magnetic about him. I found myself watching longer than I should have, curiosity tightening its grip on me. I had heard little about him before. My neighbor rarely spoke much of his father, only mentioning him in passing. So when he appeared unexpectedly, I felt an odd mixture of surprise and anticipation. It was not unusual for relatives to visit, but this man's arrival carried weight. His deep voice when he greeted the family traveled across the walls and into me like a vibration, something I couldn't easily shake off. His eyes, sharp yet warm, met mine for only a second, but that second was enough to set something inside me ablaze. Throughout the day, I caught myself stealing glances. He was not like the men I was used to seeing around here. He had a natural charm, a certain charisma in the way he spoke, how he laughed deeply, how he listened intently to those around him. Even the simplest gestures, pouring tea, leaning back in his chair, resting his hand thoughtfully on his chin, seemed to carry weight. My mind, against my will, began to wander. I found myself wondering what kind of life he lived, what kind of stories he carried within him, and why I felt so drawn to a man who should have been nothing more than my neighbor's father. When evening came, I was still restless. I went outside, pretending to water the plants just so I could catch a glimpse of him again. The air was cooler now, filled with the quiet hum of crickets. He was standing by the gate, his figure outlined against the soft glow of the streetlight. He noticed me, and instead of simply nodding as neighbors often do, he smiled, slowly, deliberately. It wasn't just a polite smile. It was the kind that seemed to carry meaning, a silent acknowledgement of something that didn't need to be spoken aloud. My heart raced as I quickly looked away, but the heat in my cheeks betrayed me. Later, as I lay in bed, I tried to dismiss the thoughts circling in my mind. He was older, he was my neighbor's father, he was off-limits in every possible way. Yet, something inside me refused to let go of that look, that smile, that fleeting moment of connection. The more I tried to convince myself it was nothing, the deeper the curiosity dug into me. There was a whisper inside, telling me that his arrival was not ordinary, that his presence in my world would unravel things I could never predict. By the time sleep finally crept in, I already knew. Today had not been just another day. Something had begun, something silent and hidden, but powerful enough to shake me. And deep down, I realized that from this point on, nothing in my life would ever feel quite the same. The next morning, I found myself waiting for any excuse to step outside, hoping I might cross paths with him again. The air was filled with the usual neighborhood sounds, voices of children running through the lanes, the faint ring of bicycle bells, but my ears were tuned only to his presence. When I finally saw him, seated casually in the veranda with a cup of tea, his posture relaxed yet commanding, it was as if my restless anticipation had been rewarded. He noticed me almost instantly, and with that same deliberate smile, he gestured lightly, as if inviting me closer. My heart hesitated, but my feet betrayed me, carrying me toward him before I had time to think. Our first real conversation began simply. He asked about the neighborhood, the people, the weather. His voice was deep, each word rolling out with calm confidence, and I found myself hanging on to every syllable. What struck me most was how attentively he listened when I spoke. His gaze did not wander. He watched me, as though every word I said mattered. That alone was disarming. Most men around here spoke with impatience, always eager to interrupt, but he seemed to savor silence, giving me space to finish my thoughts. As the days unfolded, small encounters became routine. I would pass by, and he would always greet me. Sometimes I brought over little things, tea leaves, fruit, a dish from home, pretending it was neighborly courtesy, though deep inside I knew it was only an excuse to linger near him. He never turned me away. Instead, he welcomed me warmly, each time letting our exchanges stretch a little longer. It wasn't just his presence that unsettled me, it was the way he made me feel seen. When he laughed, it was rich and genuine, filling the room in a way that made me forget the world outside. When he told stories of his homeland, of long journeys and the lessons he had learned, I found myself lost in his words, painting pictures in my head of places I had never been. And sometimes, when silence slipped between us, it was not uncomfortable, it was charged, as though we both understood what lingered unsaid. One evening, I found myself at their house again, helping his family with something trivial. He appeared suddenly in the doorway, his eyes resting on me for just a second too long. My pulse quickened, though no one else seemed to notice. Later, when I stepped outside for air, I felt him behind me. He didn't speak at first. The silence stretched, heavy and alive. When he finally did, his voice was softer, almost hesitant. He told me he appreciated my kindness, how rare it was to find someone so open-hearted. His words brushed against something tender inside me, a part of me that longed to be noticed, cherished. That night, as I replayed every detail, I realized how dangerous this had become. This was no longer harmless curiosity or polite conversation. There was a pull between us, unspoken yet undeniable, and I was already caught in its gravity. I tried to remind myself of boundaries. He was older, he belonged to a family, and I was merely a neighbor. But each reminder only seemed to crumble faster than the last. The next day, when we spoke again, the air between us carried a weight I could no longer ignore. A brush of his hand as he passed me a cup sent a shiver through me. His eyes lingered just a fraction longer than necessary, and in that tiny span of time, everything else around us seemed to fade. No words of desire were spoken, but the silence screamed with it. I returned home restless, unable to concentrate on anything else. The temptation was no longer at the edges of my mind. It was at the center, demanding to be acknowledged. I told myself it was foolishness, but deep down I knew the truth. Something inevitable was building, and soon, one way or another, a line would be crossed. That evening carried a weight I could feel in my bones, as though the air itself had thickened with something unspoken. The house was quieter than usual. The laughter and chatter of the day had faded into a calm stillness. I found myself there once again, under the familiar excuse of helping out, though deep inside I knew my reasons were no longer so innocent. He was seated alone in the living room, a book resting open on his lap, though his eyes seemed far away. When he looked up and saw me enter, a faint smile touched his lips, softer this time, as if meant only for me. I sat nearby, my heart unsteady, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't empty, it was charged, as though each breath carried words neither dared to say. He closed the book gently, setting it aside, and leaned back. His gaze held mine longer than it should have, long enough to make my chest tighten with an anticipation I couldn't name. We began speaking quietly about small things at first, the heat of the day, the way the city felt different at night. But as minutes passed, the conversation shifted. His words grew more personal, more reflective, as though he was peeling back layers he never revealed to others. He spoke of loneliness, of years spent chasing responsibilities, of how sometimes, even among people, one could feel utterly unseen. Each confession struck me, because it mirrored something within myself. For the first time, I felt as though someone had spoken the thoughts I had kept hidden all along. Without realizing it, we had moved closer. My hand rested on the arm of the chair, and when his fingers brushed against mine, it was not accidental. The touch lingered, gentle, searching, almost hesitant, yet powerful enough to send a tremor through me. I should have pulled away, but instead I stayed. My breath caught in my throat, and I dared to look up at him. His eyes were steady, filled with something both forbidden and irresistible. The silence that followed was louder than words. In that moment, the line we had both tiptoed around for days dissolved. He leaned forward, closing the space between us, his presence overwhelming, his nearness intoxicating. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only the heat of his breath, the trembling in my chest, the undeniable truth that I no longer wanted to resist. When his lips finally met mine, the kiss was not rushed. It was deliberate, slow, filled with all the longing we had hidden until now. My hands shook as they found their way to him, pulling him closer even as guilt tugged at the edges of my mind. But guilt was powerless against the flood of desire that washed over me. Every second deepened the pull, and every whisper of his voice against my ear told me there was no turning back. Time seemed to blur. The night stretched, each moment folding into the next, and I surrendered to the feelings I had tried so hard to deny. There was fire in his touch, but also tenderness, as though he wanted to memorize every detail of me. My heart pounded, torn between fear of the wrongness and the intoxicating freedom of the act itself. For once, I wasn't thinking, I was only feeling, and the feelings consumed me whole. When it was over, when the night finally stilled again, we sat in the quiet, breathing heavily, our hands still entwined. Neither of us spoke, because there were no words that could capture the enormity of what had just happened. I knew this wasn't love as the world defined it, nor was it simple desire. It was something far more dangerous, a mixture of both, wrapped in secrecy, destined to leave its mark on us forever. As I finally slipped away into the dark, the memory of his eyes lingered in my mind. I understood that life would not return to what it had been. A boundary had been broken, a forbidden truth embraced, and nothing could undo it now. The morning after carried a silence unlike any I had known. The world outside bustled as always. Children shouted in the lanes, vendors called out their prices, doors opened and closed with the rhythm of daily life. But inside me, everything felt suspended, as though I were caught between two worlds. My body still carried the memory of the night, every glance, every touch, every whisper replaying in my mind with vivid clarity. Yet with it came the weight of what it meant. I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. When I saw him again, he was standing by the veranda, sunlight catching his face in a way that made him seem both familiar and unreachable. He looked at me with quiet intensity, as though he too was unsure of how to carry the reality of what had happened. His greeting was calm, even casual, but his eyes betrayed him. They lingered on me a moment too long, filled with a mix of longing and restraint. That single look was enough to remind me that we now shared a secret too powerful to ignore. The hours that followed were filled with an unspoken tension. Around others, we behaved as though nothing had changed, but the truth clung to us like a shadow. Every time his voice rose in laughter, I heard the echo of his softer words from the night before. Every time he walked past me, I felt the ghost of his touch. I tried to bury these feelings, to remind myself that this path was dangerous, but the harder I tried, the more they surfaced. Late in the day, when we finally found ourselves alone again, neither of us spoke immediately. The silence between us was no longer awkward. It was heavy with all the things we couldn't say aloud. At last, he broke it, his voice low, carrying both tenderness and regret. He admitted that what had happened could not continue, that it was dangerous, that others could never know. Yet even as he said it, his eyes told another story, one of desire that still smoldered beneath the weight of his words. I listened, torn apart inside. Part of me wanted to agree, to seal away the memory and return to the safety of normal life. But another part, stronger, more reckless, ached to hold on to what we had found. For the first time, I felt alive in a way I hadn't before, and the thought of giving that up was unbearable. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My heart wrestled with guilt, but my mind clung to the fire he had sparked within me. I wondered what it meant. Was it love, or only desire dressed in the illusion of something deeper? I wondered what he thought when he looked at me now, whether he too carried the same turmoil, the same desperate wish for more. When he left days later, the house seemed emptier than ever. His absence pressed against me like a shadow, and every corner of the neighborhood felt quieter without him in it. I tried to convince myself it was for the best, that his departure would allow me to find peace again. But peace never came. Instead, I carried him within me, the memory of his voice, the warmth of his gaze, the forbidden night that had changed everything. I knew life would go on. I would continue with my days, smile at neighbors, go about routines as though nothing had happened. But deep down, I would always carry the truth that once, when my neighbor's African father appeared, he brought with him a storm that rewrote my heart. And though time might vary the details, the memory of that day, and all that followed, would remain etched into me forever.